Thank you for joining our presentation today, Sister Scholars, Untangling Issues of Identity as Women in Academe. My name is Ellen Lyle, and with me today on the panel are Sepideh Mahoney, Michelle Grace Williams, Anita Lafferty, and Adriana Onita. Historically, academe has been regarded as a male space owing to the assumption that knowledge is masculine. Further complicating this inequity is the tendency of academe to favor authoritarian perspectives largely associated with male ways of knowing. Scholarly writing within disciplinary contexts is one way that women can employ agency against patriarchy to author their own sense of self. In this spirit, we conceptualized a collection to raise awareness of the unique challenges faced by women in higher education contexts. Receiving an overwhelming response, we created a peer-reviewed collection representative of intersectionality, rank, and experience that speaks to both the struggles and the triumphs of women in academe. The collection contains the insights and inquiries of dozens of women scholars across more than 25 chapters. With us today, we have 4 of those chapters represented. My own chapter speaks to the experiences that teach us love, wisdom, courage, and aesthetic appreciation, while also training us to be strong and resilient. Engaging photopoetics as method, I question why we feel corralled by rules so often written without our consultation. In the second chapter, Sepideh confronts the challenges associated with balancing career and motherhood as we struggle with guilt even as we strive to succeed in male-dominated arenas. Drawing on her experiences in both the Middle East and in Canada, she explores the unique challenges and opportunities of academic mothers. In the third chapter, Michelle draws from Black feminism and critical race theory to draw attention to the challenges Black women face in a white, male-dominated society and illuminates the need for the Academy to center our experiences to help decolonize the university. The final chapter is presented by Anita and Adriana, who use poetic dialogue to shed light on their shared experiences of being minority scholars, creatively and critically attending to how patriarchal systems have encompassed their lives personally and within academe. They speak to their shared affective experiences and the need for solidarity as strong women. Through poetry, they provoke a productive rage, a gentle audacity, and a tender resistance to oppressive systems and practices in academe. Individually and collectively, sister scholars come together in this panel to share an inquiry that is both subtle and unyielding, as it interrogates historically charged explorations like those related to equality. In this way, the research shared here, while personal, is not an indulgence. It is vital to our existence and to our tireless pursuit of change. Disrupting the historical and continuing marginalization of women begins with consciousness and is followed by a commitment to living and being differently. Who knows where this consciousness begins, but when we are open to it, some small seed is planted in our minds or hearts that nudges us forward, even propels us in new directions. A few years ago, one such seed was planted while I was supervising a late career male graduate student who was examining barriers to female career progression. Together, we stumbled upon research claiming that historically, academe has been regarded as a male space owing to the assumption that knowledge is masculine. We discussed at length the genesis of this assumption and problematized the claim that knowledge can be distilled into a gender binary. But seeing this arrogance legitimized in scholarship left me deeply troubled. Having long been interested in issues of identity, I became newly curious how women could navigate this often inhospitable place without sacrificing their sense of self. The sense of self that interests me here is the one that seeks not only critical consciousness in its own right, but also deep awareness of its relationality with others and with the world. It is at this intersection where the self is neither this nor that, but the struggle that makes sense of what is in relation, that I find possibilities. I do not claim a definitive knowledge of the self as a theoretical construct. I do, however, claim a thoughtfully constructed understanding of myself as it intersects with my teaching, learning, and being. This understanding consciously seeks to resist authoritarian approaches to education that favor dehumanized and decontextualized ways of knowing. Instead, it encourages a wholeness that takes into account the breadth and depth of our individual experiences. As I began to explore possibilities that support individual ways of knowing, I found that arts integrated approaches were very helpful for the myriad ways they create space that expand the scope of human consciousness. I remember when I first encountered this process of inquiry through art making and writing, I was intrigued, not so much by the notion that we could learn through artful ways of exploration, but rather by the promise that we need not be artists to engage in such inquiries. We need only to be brave, as art is often a passage to somewhere else. For me, that passage led to photopoetic inquiry. Having poetic text accompany photographs acknowledges that both textual and visual literacy are interpretive acts subject to the distortion and lens of lived experience. Photopoetic inquiry thus creates a space where we can weave together the intellectual and aesthetic aspects of our lives while promoting the reflexive approaches to analysis that will provoke ongoing conversations. One of the many challenges of working in a field that regards its primary commodity as male is etching out this space where we as women might contribute in meaningful ways. During my own struggle to claim this room, I continue to learn from my experience and from the experience of others. While the lessons are vast and varied, there are 3 insights that continue to sustain me, insights garnered in conversation with other strong women who cleared the path as they walked it. Heather McLeod and Cecile Badenhorst remind me that women can employ agency against patriarchy through scholarly writing. The way they model this in their own writing emboldens me. While their scholarly writing is theoretically rich, it also often evidences artistic inclusions that they explicitly connect to their female identities. Sometimes these inclusions take the form of diary writing or photographs. Other times, they manifest in art-making practices historically regarded as female. Regardless of how they weave their female identities through their scholarship, they consistently discuss their educational practices as informed by these identities. In so doing, they champion spaces that become progressive rather than apologetic. In weaving together images and artifacts of selfhood with the written word, they advance understanding by inviting readers to look beyond text to the various fragments that comprise our identities. Sarah Davidson, in her Grace and Wisdom, teaches me that we must offer our stories not to gain sympathy, but to provide a concrete starting place for the dialogue to begin. Inviting people to consider how our varied perspectives complement each other is integral to advancing equity. While we may feel like raging at the continued disparity, our rage is likely to alienate people to an extent where they are unable to hear us. Sarah reminds me that we must frame our experiences in ways that adequately address our struggles without evoking an anger that will deafen our readers. She does this by weaving provocative images alongside explanatory text that manage to de-escalate even as they provoke. Words alone do not have this capacity. Stephanie Springay and her colleagues remind me that we do not exist in isolation and that we must position our work amid the efforts of others. In that spirit, and in the company of scholars present in this work with me, I invite into the conversation Adrienne Rich and Amanda Lovelace, both of whom continue to nudge me forward. I first encountered Adrienne Rich in the fall of 1993. I had just moved to Halifax to attend Mount St. Vincent University, a small liberal arts school with a 90% female student body. Adrienne Rich became my first mentor in this new place. She took on the form of a wise, if unforgiving auntie who challenged me to develop a deeper consciousness. I first encountered her work in a literature survey course, and her writing resonated with me, so I looked for other things she had published. It was then that I stumbled upon her Claiming an Education speech. Delivered as the commencement address at Douglas College in 1977, it hit all the chords for me, the inseparability of teaching and learning, the importance of authoring my own life without being pigeonholed into roles created for me, and the impossibility of speaking to women's advancement while excluding men from the conversation. She insisted that women and minorities were largely erased from the curriculum as men continued to decide what counted as legitimate knowledge. This could only end, she coached, when we started to take ourselves more seriously. I felt as though Rich were speaking directly to me, that she had issued a call to action, challenging me to live fully and apologetically, not despite my womanhood, but because of it. She left a fire in my belly as I internalized her challenge as a defining characteristic of my identity. I have learned to pick my battles, to identify those proverbial hills worth dying on, but I do so vocally and unapologetically as I try to name what feels unjust and remain relevant long enough to make some small difference. I am still learning to live out loud, seeking that delicate balance of speaking my reality in a way that can be heard. I am committed to nurturing the fire that sometimes burns a bit hot, believing that it is precious fuel that can propel me forward. In the spirit of that relentless movement, I close with the poetry of Amanda Lovelace, in appreciation not only for her work and wisdom, but with humble gratitude to all the women who came before me and to all those who will someday pick up my torch when I lay it down.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Dr. Sepideh Mohani, and it's my pleasure to present to you my chapter, Renegotiating Motherhood in Academe. Women have long struggled to choose between their careers and motherhood, mostly because societies have failed to encourage women in both roles concurrently. Since women began leaving their homes to undertake professional roles that were historically reserved for men, a single question echoes more loudly than the rest. Can women excel at both? Societies often tell women that they can have it all: a career, a well-supported family, and time for personal interest and self-care. However, the reality of balancing a career and motherhood often discards this theory. This seeming impossibility holds true in academia. Academic mothers are often faced with many challenges as they negotiate demanding schedules, a career, competition, and a disproportionate burden of domestic responsibility. Struggling to find a tenuous balance between motherhood, an academic career, and time for self leaves many women feeling guilty as they strive to succeed in male-dominated arenas. This in turn creates the context where women often must work longer and harder than their male colleagues to compensate for the time spent with their families. When a woman chooses to become a mother, it often means an added responsibility that she must augment into her pre-existing role as a wife, professional, and a homemaker. My aim in this chapter is to lay bare my struggles in these very arenas with the hope of fostering awareness in the larger community. In this autoethnography, I acknowledge my feminist lens as I share poems and narratives to suggest the complexity of women achieving balance between an academic career and motherhood. I realize that there are many ways to become a mother, and not all journeys begin as mine. I'm a planner. From the second I decided to have a baby, I was determined to do so while continuing to advance in my career. I approached these goals with naive determination, dedicated to being successful in both roles. I believed the more I planned, the better prepared I would be for what was coming my way. I premeditated what my life and schedule would be like after our son's arrival. I wanted to ensure I was doing all I could to give my child a great start in life while pursuing my career as a young academic. I read about women who did it all, and those who struggled balancing the demands of a career and motherhood. Some literature was encouraging, but majority recognized that childcare responsibilities often fell disproportionately on women, thereby reducing their productivity and resulting in a gap in their careers. Growing up, I had seen many women in my family taking a break from their careers to focus on their families. Personally, I was raised by a mother who had given up her career to be a stay-at-home mom, a decision I still believe she made because she found this juggling act too demanding, particularly as a new immigrant in a foreign country. My grandmother in Iran, however, had managed to work as a teacher for 32 years while raising 8 children. I secretly hoped that I had inherited my mother's patience, but also my grandmother's resilience as I imagined myself advancing in my career and raising my child. Like many academic women, I planned my childbirth around the schedule of my profession, particularly because at the time I was working at a higher education institution in the United Arab Emirates, where women were only entitled to 45 days of maternity leave, but I was determined to return to work in fear of losing my position in a very competitive institution. Conversations with friends who were also mothers working in Canadian universities reassured me that I was not alone. They too shared my frustrations as they never felt secure enough to take long maternity breaks and often felt their families were invisible in the eyes of their institutions and department. Once I became a mother, I was forced to rethink and renegotiate my role. I wondered how I would manage my role as a mother and as a woman who had planned to return to work. I read that the first year of a baby's life was the most imperative, and how the intense bond between a mother and child is fostered through attachment. I also read disheartening stories about mothers who never returned to work after childbirth. I wonder what my future held. In preparation for my return to work, I tried to transition to bottle feeding, but my newborn refused. As weeks went by, I wished I could take an extended leave, but upon inquiry, I was told by a human resource officer that my request for an extended leave would only be considered if it was supported by a medical note indicating I was ill. I was not ill. I was a new mother who needed time to navigate this new world. I needed time to digest the many intense emotions, the sudden isolation, the postpartum blues, and the sleepless nights. I wanted to tell him that I needed time to hold this new life in my arms and assure my baby that the world was a kind place. I wanted to argue that the meager 45 days of maternity leave were grossly insufficient, but I was afraid to utter any of my thoughts for fear that I would jeopardize my future with the institution. Mommy at the crossroad. They say we must be together for you to flourish, but we must be apart for me to advance. They say we must be attached for you to love me, but we must be apart for me to love me. They say slow down, these are the days, but you must scurry, this is a race. They say if you leave, you will never bond. Be present so he could be strong, but be prepared to fall behind. Such prospects are rare to find. I watch you asleep and wonder all day, why must I decide to leave or stay? How could I leave as my milk pours? You need my love and I long for yours. I hold you tight and take a deep breath. I whisper in your ear, Mommy will stay. Any attempt to understand and appreciate academic women's experience requires acknowledgement of the complex constitution of this gendered institution. Historically, women have always been underrepresented in higher education. However, recent data indicates that disproportion is being rectified as the numbers of female faculty is on the rise in Canadian universities. Similarly, female enrollment is on the rise in many doctoral programs, some even outnumbering male students. However, despite these promising data, the higher up the advancement ladder that we look, the fewer women that we see. Women academics still find it challenging to secure tenure and promotions or leadership position in universities. Research on work-family conflict shows that women academics experience notably more conflict in balancing work and family responsibilities than their male counterparts because of the norms structuring academic environments. Women academics are subject to an intensified work schedule and are expected to teach, research, publish, obtain funding, supervise students, mentor peers, and perform administrative tasks. This load is in addition to the challenges that are often accompanied during the pre-tenure years, such as a low pay scale and lengthy work hours. One of the main reasons why women academics continue to struggle to find balance between work and family is because of masculine normative institutional policies and practices that guide academics' behavior around work and family roles. The stigma that is attached to motherhood is not limited to one country, but it subsists in many societies around the world, because academia, like many other professional fields, is sustained and strengthened by masculine norms. As a result of such inhospitable environments, academic mothers often turn to part-time work as one of the only practical employment opportunities. As Smithson reminds us, adjunct positions are gendered positions that are generally associated with women who have children, while full-time tenure-track positions are reserved for traditional masculine working hours. Women are often deceived by society and given the illusion of choice. They are told that they can have it all, or they are often even encouraged to pause their career trajectories and return to work when their family responsibilities are less demanding. However, when they decide to return to work, they often face discrimination for putting their careers on hold, and as a result, suffer lack of advancement opportunities. Motherhood has taught me more than I could ever imagine. It has taught me that I am far more resilient than I knew. It has taught me that I can love my children beyond constraint and that I can survive on very little sleep. It has taught me that I can count on other strong women to hold my hand as I navigate my way. Motherhood has also taught me that as an academic woman, it is more imperative than ever for me to find balance, not only to stay in the race, but also to be a voice for other women who may be renegotiating their roles. I'm grateful to strong women who have recognized the challenges of motherhood and have provided opportunities and opened doors for me, allowing and encouraging my two roles to coexist. Academia needs more of these strong women who advocate for their sisters and impact and reshape the historical male-dominated policies and institutional structures.
Hi everyone, I am Dr. Michelle Grace Williams, and it is a pleasure to share with you my autoethnography, which builds on my fellow panelists' discussion of the experiences of women in the academy. For the next few minutes, I'd like to focus your attention on the topic, scripting myself into white male-dominated academic spaces, a Black feminist perspective on decolonizing the university. I would like to begin by saying, in the words of Delgado and Stefancic, critical race scholars, it takes a multitude of the oppressed to make their voices heard and felt. But what about the voices that do not fit into one single category of oppression? Will social progress let them slip through the cracks? In this vein, I aim to address how the intersectionality of gender and race present unique challenges for Black women in and outside the academy, and argue for the decolonizing of the university through a recognition of our stories that move beyond tokenism. Black women's knowledge is often missing from academic courses and policymaking decisions, limiting opportunities for university students and, in my case, teacher candidates' ability to gain insights from us to challenge racism in K-12 schools, and for Black TCs to see representations of themselves in the academy, which would serve to affirm their identities and empower them. Black women's embodied knowledge and experiences must be recognized as sources of survival, healing, and empowerment in the face of racism. Efforts to decolonize the university must draw from our counter-knowledge and acknowledge our contributions. Thus, drawing from our knowledge as an instructor, I seek to engage in pedagogies that Hannah, in her work, Pedagogies in the Flesh, contends, offer the opportunity to concretize theory into practice, allowing us to pursue actively a society that uses flesh and blood experiences to actualize our dreams for liberation and healing. Before I delve further into my work, first let me begin by acknowledging my own positionality and why this work matters to me. Here are photos of the 10-year-old me and older me in a framed photo, and my mother, my first storyteller, who taught me the importance of counter-storytelling in the face of racism. As a Black woman and instructor, one of only 3 in my department, I have experienced racism and continue to live in a racist world, which shapes my research lens and teaching. I grew up in Jamaica and learned early about the enslavement of my ancestors and the impact of British colonialism on my country. My critical awareness of the problem of racism deepened in the North American context as I began to experience daily overt and covert racism. As I shared my stories with fellow racialized individuals and learned about theirs, I began to appreciate the power of telling our stories. Displayed on the screen is a Jamaican independence plate passed from my grandmother to my mother. It was an important home artifact as my mother explained to me the significance of my history and the importance of remembering my ancestors' fight for freedom. Told by her through a feminist lens, I recognized early how Black women's stories can provide healing, encouragement, and call us into action against oppression. Black feminism and critical race theories are lenses I use in this research because both provide opportunities to use our stories as tools of resistance. As Patricia Collins argued, as long as Black women's subordination within intersecting oppression of race, class, gender, sexuality, and nation persists, Black feminism as an activist response to that oppression will remain needed. Critical race theory is salient to my discourse on the experiences of Black female professors because it places race, racism, and our intersectionalities at the center of it. CRT also allows me to use counter-narratives to name our daily realities, gain psychic preservation, and share our experiential knowledge through the use of creative methods. So drawing from my childhood experiences and focusing on what Ettore in her work Autoethnography as Feminist Method described as the transformative power of writing the self, I often write what I call race scripts in my personal journal to critically reflect on my racialized experiences in the academy and unearth teaching insights for using Black women's stories, or what Collins referred to as oppositional knowledge, as tools of resistance to the silencing of our voices in the academy. Writing these race scripts is a coping mechanism in the face of racism. I'm choosing to author my story to illuminate the self that informs my work, the self too often missing from academic discourses, and to encourage other educators to do the same. These race scripts include observations of microaggressions, racist comments, daily experiences with racism in and outside the academy, and lines of poems or songs that speak to my experiences. I later used these race scripts to create ethnopoems that speak to the experiences of Black women. As critical race scholars, Delgado and Stefanski argued, telling our stories is crucial because many victims of racial discrimination suffer in silence or blame themselves for their predicament. Stories can give them voice and reveal that others have similar experiences. Stories can name a type of discrimination. Once named, it can be combated. Powerfully written stories and narratives may begin a process of correction in our system of beliefs and categories by calling attention to neglected evidence and reminding readers of our common humanity. To illustrate, I would like to read to you a poem I wrote in response to the murder of George Floyd. In it, I'm pointing to the need to recognize how racism affects Black women and their families and encourage you to take action with us against oppression. So it's entitled, I Can't Breathe. I can't breathe. Your pre-existing condition of hate is stopping my breath, blocking me from the air that you did not create. Ears untrained to hear my pain, I shut to oppression. Social distancing. Blue light flashing, red blood spilling, Black Lives Matter. The virus is loose, need into privilege. My heart stops, your hate lives. You took my humanity, you gave yours away. Where's the vaccine for this pandemic? So I hope that you will reflect on the words of this poem and recognize that it is a call to take action. Black mothers know. What do they know? They know too well the impact of racism on their families and communities. For instance, the women represented in this picture all lost their children to police brutality or negligence. Patricia Collins argued that mothering is shaped by the sociocultural issues experienced by Black mothers in their daily lives. She argued that Black women often have to deal with the challenge of helping their children develop a positive racial identity in a racialized society that discriminates against Black people. Thus, anti-racist teaching and decolonizing methods in white male-dominated academic spaces must draw from Black women's knowledge. To illustrate what Black mothers know and emphasize the urgency needed in drawing from their knowledge in anti-discriminatory work, I would like to share what Miss May, a Jamaican immigrant grandmother to the U.S. and participant in my dissertation research, did to help her Black grandson cope with institutional racism. He felt he was unfairly punished at school for defending himself against the attack of his white peers, who were bullying him. He was punished, they were not. The teacher refused to listen to his side of the story. In an attempt to help him cope with this trauma and prepare him for bias in a racist society, she told him to draw a picture illustrating his side of the story. From her, I gained more insights on the decolonizing and anti-racist work Black women are doing in their home, and developed a deeper awareness that any effort to do this work in the academy must not include them. As Paula Ferrer argued, we must work with and not for the oppressed in order not to reproduce the very oppression we seek to challenge. Reflecting on Miss May and her grandson's story and other women's stories I've had the privilege of learning from, I wrote the following poem called Black Woman Knowledge, BWK. It speaks to the power of our stories to break down barriers in the academy, connected to a strong emphasis on challenging Eurocentric knowledge production. It says, we are mothers, sisters, daughters, wives, teachers, freedom fighters, binders of wounds. We have knowledge to break walls, stories to retell, hidden too long in your lives, so truth can take center stage. Wisdom rests in our experiences. Unwrap them, know them, learn from them. We have knowledge to break walls. I would like to close by reading another poem I created for my race script called Literature Circle, Learning to Read Her Story. It is a call to action to all educators. This poem reflects my attempt to interrupt the silencing of Black women's stories or voices by using our stories to raise the critical consciousness of teacher candidates in my anti-discriminatory education course. The poem was created from my scripts on Afro-Caribbean women's cultural knowledge and racialized experiences in North America. The recurring theme of learning to read her story is a call again to all educators and all instructors in the academy to use our stories to help decolonize their minds. So it begins. Story time. Read aloud her story, my story. Hidden figures standing up for Black women empowerment. Makers and shapers of her story. My veranda stories demanding action, not a bag of mouth. Emancipate yourself from mental slavery. Demolish all the isms. Bristol plantation pedagogy speaks. Learn to read her story. Enter Miss Louise Bennett, a Jamaican patois advocate. Love for me language, not a corruption of English. Dick and Jane cannot tell for me story. My tongue is loose. Learn to read her story. I come to you with hidden stories, putting the fragments together. Jamaica, colonized by the Spanish, 1494 to 1665. Colonized by the British, 1665 to 1962. They took my ancestors' names, language, culture, and dignity. But I will use Fimi language, Fimi tongue to rewrite them fake news. Learn to read her story. Enter Nanny of the Maroons, colonized but fighting back. Jamaican female freedom fighter, and an embodiment of rebellion. Not a victim, but a victor. Talawa, our word for power and resilience. Why did they rip her story page from your textbook? Hashtag, say her name. Walk around the room, put on your reading glasses, and read aloud the stories I bear. Do you see what I see? Learn to read her story. By including transnational accounts of Black women's struggles, I'm calling attention to the need to also recognize our nuanced experiences. Their learning to read means breaking from Eurocentric ideologies to embrace different ways of knowing and being in the world. By putting on their reading glasses to see the stories I bear, they would develop the critical insights needed for engaging in anti-bias teaching. It is important to learn our stories before we become victims. It is also important to focus on stories that document our resilience, resistance, and contributions to the society. Decolonizing the university, as Delgado and Stefancic argued, cannot be achieved without our calling attention to neglected evidence that our voices matter in the fight against hegemonic ideologies and institutional discrimination. Thank you for listening. I am looking forward to your comments and questions.
Negudagundi, Sate Anita Lafferty. Hello everyone, my name is Anita Lafferty. I am pictured on the right. I am a PhD candidate at the University of Alberta. I am of Dene and Cree descent from the Lillikwe First Nation in Northwest Territories, and my research is focused on Dene Ke, ways of knowing on the land. My co-author, pictured on the left, is Adriana Onita. She is also a PhD candidate at the University of Alberta in language education. She is of Romanica Canadian descent, and her research focus is art-based curricula for heritage language maintenance. We met during a conference in the spring of 2019 and felt an immediate connection to each other as we're both poets and minorities in academia. For this project, we began conversing during September 2019. I currently living in Alberta and Adriana currently living in Italy. Our chapter is called Gently Stomping with Goninatse and Nadajede, a poetic duo ethnography between Atsili Esquiu and Romanica in academia. Our poems are a direct response to the call, which asks us to offer our stories not to gain sympathy, but instead to provide a concrete starting place for the dialogue to begin, and to frame our experiences in ways that address our struggles without evoking anger in our readers. So we asked ourselves, what does it mean to begin from a concrete place? And what does without evoking anger do for us as Celia Squiu and Romanica? And how can we untangle our anger through poetry by daring to provoke a provocative rage, a gentle audacity, and a tender resistance? At first, we did not have the answers to these large questions, but we let the poetry lead and lure us as we followed trustingly with Goninatse and Nadaje, strong mind, and a faith and hope in the process. I've often found in the Academy that Indigenous peoples and scholarship are confined within limiting and often oppressive structures. With that in mind, I'm cognizant that my ancestors are always with me on this journey, and without them, I would not be here. And so this idea of walking in this concrete abyss, this concrete academia space, I've had to do so with a strong mind and a strong heart. And so this poem is called With Goninatse, which means strong mind, with strong mind. So I read this to you. What is evoking this feeling of unease? Is it the sounds of societal discourse that runs through her veins, often raping her of a voice, and disguised as reconciliation, found hiding in the shadows too turbulent to overcome? Rise, Goninatse. She hears the roars of her ancestors shouting. She feels their presence as she walks forward through the concrete abyss. The offerings of her ancestors persist her spirit with great triumph and wisdom. They speak silently through the heartstone of her daily encounters. She is learning to listen with the grace of silence as these words, Goninatse, pierce her heart, leaving strength. She begins to breathe the fire words of her ancestors in order to connect to the Academy, growing her mind to be of Goninatse in ways unimaginable to her childhood self. She finds herself weaving in and out of cultural consciousness within the institution that tried and tried again to define her, but her resistance is futile, and overcoming the abysmal depths of the Academy is profound. She will not be another number, for she recognizes the spiritual aspect of the embodied knowledge she carries when traveling these halls of the Academy. She recognizes the injustices and fights forward alongside her ancestors with Goninatse in her own way.
Hello, bună ziua. This is now Adriana Onita, the other poet in this piece with Anita, and I will be reading you two poems out of the collection that we wrote on being young females in academia. The first poem is called Self-Portrait Without Evoking Anger. And so often as young women, we have to navigate these spaces without producing a rage in others so that we can actually accomplish things. So this poem kind of meditates on that. Self-portrait without evoking anger. Self-portrait as cement, as concrete place for the dialogue to begin, as parking lot, pavement, with cracks, sa crească păpădia, or as a softer place, pământ, to land, root, sprout împreună. Self-portrait as first day of school, with lime green blazer, with 17 selfies in front of Ed North mural, with which angle will not evoke anger. Self-portrait marking 84,000 words within 2 business days, with inima palpitating in the south stairwell, with rage, lacrim wiped from keyboard, with you're lucky to have this opportunity. Self-portrait asking for an extension, reaching hand across. Self-portrait as reply, blood rushing towards feet. There is no flexibility. I too am caught with the same deadline and twice the student numbers. Self-portrait as young româncă, apologizing in academia, cu frică, cu furie, with guilt for taking off o după-amiază to be among the wildflowers, with withered crini on her desk, petalele refusing to fall. Self-portrait with nădejde, the trust that the petals will grow again. So nădejde is this Romanian word, my mother tongue, that has no perfect equivalent in English. It is a mixture of hope, faith, and trust in a process or a person. And it is a concept I've used to help me get through or survive my academic life, which often seems so inhospitable.
One aspect that came to light during my conversations with Adriana was the similarity in experiences that we had within the academy, both being minorities and women. And it was almost an act of rebalancing ourselves and supporting one another and respecting each other in our journey. And so it's been very important to honor that. And in the way that I honored it was to acknowledge the passageway that us as women encounter. And so this poem had come to light, called Femme Passageway. Routing a way forward through channels of connections, creating flowing streams for the future as we begin meandering the waves that come and go, digressing the academy, remarks of insignificance, changing our rhythms as the seasons shift. This passageway leads downstream, notably to wider, expansive routes. The water's strength brings forth more physical demands as we seek calmer waters that guide us through the cycles of diversity within the river systems, the cycles of the fish, of the landscapes, of the seasons. The passageways are challenging if unaware. As we navigate the water systems, we find ways to shift routes of natural forces, sharing our stories while cartographing our journeys and mapping the future. Celebrating our in-betweenness as a spiritual flux within us explodes, the waterways of sovereignty and of feminine notion denote successful voyages as we drift towards a recognizable place of honor and integrity, a rightful and worthy place, the place where the passageways meet in a harmonious tranquility of femininity and matriarchal visions. We profoundly emerged in a waterfall of serenity. Nayeli.
So this next poem inquires into the flesh and the feelings, or the affective experiences of being a minority woman in academia. And so I use sort of a stream of consciousness style, list poem, and anaphora to emphasize, the speed of our academic lives and the seemingly endless exhaustion and the hilariously relatable highs and lows. And I do find that, as David Halifax in 2012 said, this sort of poetic embodied writing allows us to, quote, stray from the strictures of abstract, conventional, academic, and scholarly prose, and instead tap, touch, caress, hug, pat, cuddle its flesh. So I think if it wasn't for poetry, I wouldn't have come to these insights by another route in academia. This poem is called To-Do List. Stretch, check. Fold body forward like clock hands, check. Lumbar strain, check. Spend 85 ore in Shir on one grant application, check. Choose topic based on likelihood of funding, check. Go above, go beyond, volunteer, check, check, check. Meet deadline casi muerta, check. Reminder that's why it's called deadline, check. Learn to pray on bus, check. Check phone, check watch, check enema for palpitations, check. Allow deep breath while refreshing email, check. Receive rejection, check. Waste entire bus ride weeping on phone, check. Measure self-worth in grant dollars, check. Try again, fail again, fail better, check, check, check. Look up who said that, check. Remind others Samuel Beckett was full of shit, check. Attend session on work-life balance in academia scheduled during finals, check. Take notes, check. Overhear tenured profs rant about how millennials can't handle anything, check. Head home, remove makeup, make toast. Suspend self in bathwater. Odihneshtete, check. Another semester, check. End last email with warm regards, check. Stretch again, this time to limits, check. Skip checkup, reschedule dentist, check and check. Buy tulips for migraines, check. Trifurculum, la ultimul minut, check. Risk application on topic that matters to me, check. Hear from peer, don't worry, you'll get it with a name like Adriana Onitza, check. Wait 4 months in agony while working 3 jobs, check. Refresh Gmail, receive Killam, massive check. Sob uncontrollably at gate 52 on the way to Congress, check. Overhear peer at conference, I don't get how she got it. She didn't even get the shirk, check. Collect fake, aw, congrats, hun, from same peer, check. Deposit check. Transcribe Beyonce quote in Kayet, best revenge is your paper, check. Wear loudest yellow polka dot dress to present papers in 3 associations, check. Untwist tongue to perform your perfect English, check. Field questions that are actually comments from men older than my father, check. Fact check them on the spot, check. Gracefully take note of books that have nothing to do with my topic, check. Hold rage in, check out, check. Vent, thirst, slur, defy, resist, check. Meet Anita, check. Wilt with tulips, check again. Audre Lorde said, it is poems that give us strength and courage to see, to feel, to speak, and to dare. And Laurie Nielsen says, poetry asks me to ask bigger questions, to take down the names of ghosts. Poetry asks me, what on earth are you doing here? I have asked myself that every day. What on earth am I doing here? The academy has been very challenging, toxic, and debilitating at times, as I've tried to express through my poetry, but also wonderfully exhilarating and rewarding and delightful at all their times. And, if it were not for these poems and this dialogue with Anita, I would not have had the courage to speak about my feelings and experiences in academia in the last 10 years. But also I'm comforted by these incredible female friendships and mentorships and opportunities that are in the academy. So I'm going to end just on one poem that is more a call for hope and community, and we're not alone in this. We are sister scholars. This is called A înflori împreună, which is, in my mother tongue, it means to bloom together. I have been thinking of the way primăvara revine mereu, that relentlessness, how we might carry that with us. Dorința aceea de a înflori împreună. Înflori, to bloom, împreună, together. They want me to italicize these words, to translate my cells, to footnote my body. But soarele does not say to florile, if only you stood more at an angle, if only you had more petals, if only you were more accessible, I would give you my warmth, my light. So for me, it's really that old saying of lighting another candle doesn't need to dim the first candle. I am eternally grateful for these opportunities to come together as female, as non-binary people, and just offer love, care, and support.
We appreciate you joining us for our presentation today, and we hope now that we can join you in conversation.